Good morning, everyone. I'm happy to see so many people in this room, so much interest for this topic on fisheries subsidies. Please let me inform you that this session will be recorded, so it will be uploaded in the next days on the ISD Hub website, so that you know. And my name is Anneli Ehlers. I'm working with GIZ, the German service provider for international cooperation in the field of sustainable development. Our main commissioner is the BMZ, which is the German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development. And I'm happy to see so many people here. We had one session yesterday already on the fisheries subsidies topic within this ISD hub, which gave an overview about all the background setting and how to frame the subsidy negotiations in the sustainability background. We have no direct cable to the WTO negotiations room, so we will not delve into the specifics of any controversial topics today, but we decided to take a step back and present some tools for possible implementation of an agreement and some approaches and initiatives on the way ahead. I will give you a short overview how we decide or plan to structure this 1 hour we have together here. So we have 3 speakers who will have short presentations on, as I said, approaches, tool, initiatives, how to implement it. And I would like to keep questions to the end of the session, so please spare your questions, note them down, and at the end we should have plenty of time for discussions and questions that you may have to the speakers. But before I introduce our 3 speakers, I want to introduce Mr. Christian Bilfinger from BMZ, as I said, the German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, who will give some welcoming words to us. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Hope everyone is well. It's a little crowded here. Glad that there's so much interest in fisheries. Now I'll be completely transparent with you guys. I'm not a fishery expert, and I'm not going to pretend to be one for the next hour, but it looks to me that MC12 and MC13 right now prove that maybe I should become a fisheries expert, because this really puts fisheries at the front and center of trade negotiations, and rightly so. My government, and of course that includes my ministry, supports an ambitious WTO Fisheries Subsidies Agreement to rebuild fish populations and thus ensure sustainable incomes for fishers that depend on these resources for their livelihoods. We sincerely hope that the second wave of negotiations will conclude successfully and allow us to tackle the underlying role of subsidies in incentivizing unsustainable fishing as envisioned by SDG 14.6. Or, as our colleagues would put it, the WTO is not off the hook just yet. As my colleague Anneli just mentioned, the negotiations are ongoing. Let's hope for a good outcome. First of all, I'd like to thank our friends from ISD for organizing another hub, another trade and sustainability hub here at the sidelines of the ministerial conference. I think it really shows the convening power that ISD has, and in giving us a forum to speak openly, speak frankly, and have these discussions, which are elements that are sometimes maybe lacking at the WTO. So a big thanks to ISD, and also for accepting this round of discussion and participating themselves on an expert level. Now we at BMZ have the German Development Corporation have supported ISD's work to create a self-assessment tool, and we consider this instrument to be very useful for taking the first steps towards implementing a WTO agreement on fisheries subsidies. Now, Germany was also among the first donor countries to contribute to the WTO Fisheries Fund. Being aware that fair and inclusive negotiations, including LDC countries, are key, we further have been supporting the participation of LDC representatives to the negotiation rounds in the WTO since 2019, because it is at the core of our interest as the Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development that ADCs are not just rule takers, but also rule makers. So we've been working on that. To this effect, my ministry continues its support to the Fisheries Transparency Initiative, recognizing that transparency and stakeholder participation are essential prerequisites to successful sustainable fisheries management. In this session, we therefore want to focus on the opportunities that arise from a joint implementation of the WTO Fisheries Subsidies Agreement, what positive aspects can be expected, in particular for artisanal small-scale fisheries. The aim of this event is equally to network and offer more opportunities to integrate our knowledge, break our siloed thinking. Working in a German ministry, I know a thing or two about siloed thinking and siloed working, so I hope that we can overcome this type of dynamic here and find fruitful partnerships and create synergies. My ministry, the BMZ, is convinced that we won't succeed with the necessary transformation of our agricultural and food systems if we do not start managing aquatic resources sustainably all over the world. Therefore, a positive outcome at MC13 on fisheries subsidies would be a strong signal for sustainability and food security on our planet. Now, this is all from the non-expert on this panel. Now on to the experts. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. I would like to introduce our three speakers shortly, and then I will hand over to you. So we will start with a presentation by Mr. Sven Biermann, who is the Executive Director of the Fisheries Transparency Initiative. Then we will follow on with Tristan Irschlinger from IISD, who will present the self-assessment tool. And last but not least, it's Jonathan Werner from the WTO Fisheries Fund is a short version, but let's say Fisheries Funding Mechanism Trust Fund of the WTO. Thank you very much. So we will start with Sven, and please go ahead, and I will keep the time.
Perfect. Thank you, Annelie. Thank you, Christian, for the opening words. Good morning to everyone. As you see, we do a little bit different than with the other side events. We actually have some slides to show, but we promise to make it short and sweet. So one of the tools that cannot be separated from the WTO Fisheries Subsidies Agreement is transparency. So I'm going to try and set the scene a little bit on the aspect of transparency in fisheries. And I haven't really counted, but I've been through pretty much all of the sessions yesterday and today. And in any session, it's always the word transparency. It's always that magic buzzword, almost like a magical wand that you wave, and things will get better as a prerequisite. But when it comes to transparency in fisheries, we have to be a bit more nuanced. And that nuance comes with understanding why do we actually want to have something transparent? What's the purpose of making things transparent? So there are multiple reasons for that, and I have limited time, so I'm going to go very, very quickly through that. But there are lots of endeavors to make transparent what happens between the sea and the plate, to strengthen consumer confidence, seafood traceability, etc. There are equally lots of activities happening at the moment on ocean-based transparency, using technology to see which boat is in an area where it's not supposed to be, etc. And there are activities on making fisheries management more transparent. And if you've been to the session yesterday, there was a lot of focus on fisheries management, because this will become a centerpiece in the Fish 2. It's already part of Fish 1, but I think it will get even more prominence in Fish 2 if it is agreed upon, on how to get exceptions, flexibility, etc. So the main purpose of transparency from our point of view, and as a Fisheries Transparency Initiative we work on transparency fisheries management, is to ensure that there is proper governance of fisheries management. And that is basically, in very simple terms, like a balance. You need to make sure that those who make the decisions have the right data available to them, but you also need the other side that has a chance to look at whether this data has been applied properly, if decisions have been made in the best interest of the stakeholders, And I think there is no better and more appropriate stakeholder group in fisheries than the people who actually go fishing, and that is also the small-scale fisheries group. So the purpose of transparency is to lay the foundation, to provide a tool to see whether decisions are made in a sustainable. I have to go on that way. Now, when we look at the small-scale sector, and again, I'm touching on that very superficially, we see that very often it's not only that information on the small-scale sector is not publicly accessible, very often information is not even available to the government. And that brings several consequences with it, which again are important in the context of fishery subsidies, because we see in many of the countries that we work with a marginalization of the small-scale sector when it comes to national economic planning, support that the government is providing. We've seen this in many countries with COVID-19 relief funds not reaching the small-scale fishers community because it wasn't even, there was no data about them, not even sure how many are in the country, informal sector, etc. So that is an important point, to make transparent what is available and what information is actually missing. The sector is also quite often marginalized when it comes to fisheries management compared to industrial fishing. And we see this, that there are stock assessments available for commercially fished stocks that are more relevant to the industrial fishing fleet, such as tuna, whereas local stocks, octopus, sea cucumber, etc., are not available. So again, there is a focus more on actors not in the small-scale sector, and small-scale fishers are often also not part of the decision-making process in countries. So transparency is not just a nice-to-have feature. It actually has very severe consequences for the stakeholders, and in particular the small-scale fishers community. So in very short, this is what the Fisheries Transparency Initiative is trying to contribute to, and the pun over there is intended, reusing the infamous IUU acronym. We see that in many countries, the small-scale sector is very often invisible because we don't have enough data in the public. With that means it's undervalued, in particular when it comes to aspects that are non-financial, such as employment, the role of women, food and nutrition security, and that leads overall to an underappreciation of the sector. So we work with governments around the world to make information not only about small-scale fisheries, but about fisheries management more publicly available. So what does that mean now for transparency and subsidies and the small-scale sector? Now, we don't have Fish 2 yet in the books, and hopefully we will have something by the end of the week. But what we can already say is, with the WTO Agreement Fish 1 already in place, it makes, obviously, subsidies information accessible in the public. And that is for many countries where it's going to be a big first step, because at the moment this information is not easily accessible in the public. There is obviously the WTO reporting, the notification, but it's not that easy to find the information, understand the information. So making information easily accessible is something where I think the WTO Fish 2 will contribute to. But for me, the most important thing is it will provide context. It's not just numbers, but it provides context in order to see which fish stocks are overfished. What are the fisheries management regulations? And when we saw the discussions yesterday, there are prohibitions, and then there are flexible, how do you call them? Exceptions, flexibilities, and a lot of them depend on fisheries management. And so making this information publicly available in a way that is seen as credible, which I think is very important, that transparency is always seen with having the stakeholders at the table, is something that the WTO will trigger. From our point of view, it will not be fully sufficient, but it will trigger that mindset for transparency. But, and I think we also have to be very fair about this, transparency in the WTO agreement is not just on distant water fishing fleets. It will also be equally equivalent to the small-scale sector. And we have, in many countries, local fish stocks that are overfished, that are targeted by small-scale fishers, that are the recipient of subsidies. So this will also be made transparent. But in closing, transparency is not just about making certain information publicly available. It is actually a shift in the mindset. And I think the WTO agreement forces all the countries to have that transparency mindset and bringing more information into the public domain. And if it is then complemented with initiatives such as the Fisheries Transparency Initiative, I think then it has the power to become really a game changer also for the small-scale fisheries community. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Sven, for this very valuable information, perfectly on time. Thanks a lot. So now I hand over to Tristan from ISD.
Thanks a lot, Anne-Lee. I hope I will be on time as well. Let me know if I'm not. But yes, so as mentioned by Anne-Lee in opening, ISD has developed this self-assessment tool to assist WTO members to really prepare for the implementation of the Fisheries Subsidies Agreement. And so I'm going to present in a few slides what this tool does and how it can be used to implement the agreement. Starting with a few preliminary remarks, to mention again that the goal is really to help members to prepare for the implementation of the agreement. You have the link here on the slide. It's also easy to find it on Google. It's available in English, but it's also available in French and Spanish, so the three official languages of the WTO. And you know, government representatives can download the tool and essentially decide for themselves what they want to do with the tool and what they want to do with the results of the tool. So that's really a tool that can be used in a purely confidential way within administrations. And some members may choose to share some of the results, possibly with some assistance providers. Others may choose to keep all the information for themselves, to keep it confidential, so that's really their own decision. An important note is that the tool is not an official legal interpretation of the Fisheries Subsidies Agreement, so it's only ISD's attempt to provide some guidance on what we think the new rules mean and what they require in terms of implementation, but it should not be taken as official legal advice on the disciplines. Now, we all know that there may be some new rules that will be concluded this week at the WTO Ministerial. So if that is the case, the tool will be updated to reflect those new rules and have a comprehensive tool that looks at everything that has been agreed. So let's maybe now move to the tool itself. And so essentially the tool consists of two documents. The first is what we call the checklist. So that's a series of tables to be filled out by providing information and by answering questions. And that's really the center of the self-assessment exercise, because that's the document on which government officials will actually work when they do the self-assessment exercise. The second document is what we call the guide, and it's meant to really be a supporting document that provides explanations on how to fill the checklist. So for each table that you will find in the checklist, for each column or each question that you have in those tables, you will have a corresponding part in the guide that gives some guidance on what it means and how to go about it in this self-assessment exercise. Most importantly, on the second part of this slide, what you see is that the tool has really been developed to help WTO members do several things. And it essentially proceeds in two parts, which you see here on the left. So under the first part, it will really help WTO members to collect and to record the key information and data that's needed for implementing the agreement. And that's done through what we call inventory tables. And we'll come back to that in the next slide. And then there is the second part of the assessment, which is really the core part, because it looks at the legal obligations that are included in the treaty. And the tool here allows members to assess the current level of alignment with the new rules and to identify any corrective action that needs to be undertaken. So this is really about the current policy situation with regards to the new rules. For example, to identify if any prohibited subsidies are provided at that given time. But the tool also allows members to assess whether the mechanisms needed for ongoing alignment with those rules are in place domestically. And this aspect here is very much about the long term, right? So it's really not a snapshot of the immediate situation, but more the situation regarding ongoing alignment mechanisms. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, the tool also allows members to identify and to articulate where they would need technical assistance and capacity building support for implementing the new rules. And again, we'll come back to this, but this aspect is key because it will be particularly important from the perspective of developing countries and their capacity to implement the agreement. And that's going to be specifically important for small-scale fisheries on which very often, as you mentioned, Sven, data can be particularly scarce. So that's a really important aspect because assistance can be particularly useful here. So that gives you a good overview of what the tool is. So as I mentioned, the first step is really collecting key information that's needed for implementation. The tool does that by organizing this information collection process through inventory tables. And you have 4 of them. So one first table that is about the domestic fisheries subsidies that fall within the scope of the agreement. So identify all the programs that may be disciplined by the rules. Then a table about the fleets that receive subsidies and the stocks that they fish. And that comes with an additional catch data table. There is then a third table on the status of stocks that are fished by subsidized fleets. And that's mostly important for the discipline on overfished stocks. And finally, there is a table on vessels and operators identified as engaged in IUU fishing. Again, as you will have guessed, most relevant for the discipline on IUU fishing. The information from these tables is then very useful to answer the many questions in the checklist. So that's why we centralize that information collection exercise at the beginning of the exercise. And I wanted to mention something very important, which is that data will not be perfect as countries go through the tool. And that's not the end of the world, in a way, right? Data won't be perfect, especially for more artisanal fisheries, but users should really use what's available today to have a sense of where they stand regarding those new rules. And again, the tool allows to identify needs for technical assistance and for capacity building, also in terms of information collection. So that's something that can be recorded and articulated through the tool. So that was about really that first part, which is information collection. And then there is what is really the core part of the tool. 1 minute, so I'll try to be very quick. And so here, just to mention quickly, it takes all the legal obligations in the treaty, one by one, and for each of them, it allows to go through 2 steps. The first is current alignment, and we have a current alignment table for that, for each obligation, and that's really to assess the current level of alignment with an obligation. So today, are we aligned, and do we need to do anything to align with this rule? So it's a snapshot of the immediate policy situation. Second, for each obligation, there is also the ongoing alignment table. And here it's really much more about assessing whether domestic mechanisms needed to enable ongoing alignment with the rules are in place, to identify gaps if they are not in place, and also to articulate needs for technical assistance when they are not in place. And so that's really about assessing the mechanisms that enable ongoing alignment, not only for today, but also for the future. So, so that's the distinction between those two steps. Almost done. So I just wanted to provide you with a summary. In a nutshell, what this tool is a tool that allows a self-diagnosis of the national situation with regards to the rules in the agreement. Are we aligned with those rules? What do we need to do to align with those rules? And what technical assistance do we need to implement those rules? It focuses on what is strictly required by the agreement, so that's really the focus of the tool. Each government chooses how it wants to use the results. It can be purely confidential, but it can also be to inform requests for assistance. And finally, you may be interested to know that the tool is actually already being used by some WTO members. That we are aware, there is Belize, Costa Rica, Senegal, South Africa, St. Kitts and Nevis, St. Lucia, Trinidad and Tobago, and Tunisia. But since it is publicly accessible and members don't have an obligation to inform us when they use it, it may very well be the case that it's actually used in many more WTO members. Finally, just to mention that, of course, IISD is happy to have further conversations about this tool and to explore opportunities for support if that would be useful. So that's about it. This is the landing page of the website where you find it. You can download the two documents on the tool on this website.
Thank you very much, Tristan. I think this is a very useful tool, and I'm now happy to hand over to Jonathan. I think you have to, a few slides more. Yeah, to give his presentation.
Thank you, Anneli. Thank you. First, pleasure to be here. I will absolutely do my best to ensure that I am as punctual to maximize time for discussion, questions, so on and so forth. I'll structure the very brief 8 minutes into 3 main topics. I'll just go over the origins of the fund. Then I'll talk a little bit where we are on the establishment of the fund and the priority areas, and then more specifically how support is intended. So it's good to start from the beginning, and from the get-go, there was absolutely vocal request from developing countries and LDC members for technical assistance and capacity building to implement the disciplines of the agreement. In the run-up for in June 2022, donors also recognized that this was very much needed and agreed with beneficiaries to establish a voluntary funding mechanism, and this was really front and center to the point that it was actually enshrined in the agreement in Article 7. From the beginning also there was a recognition of the fact that there are already a few very well established actors in this space, and that coordination and cooperation with the FAO, the International Fund for Agricultural Development, and the World Bank was needed to ensure that there isn't any duplication, and that we could make the best out of technical assistance that will be given by the fund. There was a lot of discussion from the get-go as ensuring that the fund is not a
The time is 2 o'clock p.m.
It is true. Okay. That the fund is not a mechanism of last resort, quite the contrary, that once it is set up and operational, the idea is that it will be very much available for members to tap in the beginning. And the key principles of the fund and the agreement also need to be preserved, which is really to maintain that triple win of the agreement, tapping into obviously the trade aspect, but also the developmental and the environmental aspect, which speak to implementation of the disciplines. So, very happy to say that things are going very well. Donors and WTO members that have contributed to the fund have been very, very generous. We have now more than 14 million Swiss francs. And we're still designing operations and how the fund is going to come to light. I'll speak about that in the next 3 minutes, promise. As you've seen, this last week, Korea made a contribution, and the UAE also stepped up and made an additional contribution just 2 days ago. There is a lot of interest and a lot of engagement, and we have some board members, some steering committee members around the table as well. So we managed to have the first Fish Fund Steering Committee on the 31st of January. We managed to compose a steering committee that is very robust, with 8 members that contributed to the fund, 8 beneficiaries, 6 of them being from developing countries, 2 being from LDCs, and the WTO, the FAO, the World Bank, and IFAD also are part of that committee. The committee, very cognizant that priority number 1 is operationalization by entry into force of the agreement, which will hopefully be very soon, which also highlights the importance of getting the work done and ensuring that the fund is set up quickly so it can attend to members' requests as soon as it enters into force. What members have decided in this inaugural meeting was to split into 3 areas that will be tapped in simultaneously. First, there's a preoccupation with ensuring that the governance structure of the fund is up and running as soon as possible in setting up the rules of procedure. Second, there is a group preoccupied with how to ensure that we have very practical aspects that members can apply for requests for assistance, and that is beneficiary centric, and that is and then there's the adequate collaboration with the core partners of the fund, which I mentioned already, and of course there will be a working group very much preoccupied with setting up the initial monitoring and evaluation systems, because accountability and transparency of all activities is paramount, and this will focus really on defining what are the clear reporting requirements, both for the fund and also at the project level, but also what is the log frame that of the activities that the fund will support. Last but not least, the initial support focus areas of the fund, as providing the initial discussions of a concept note, which I believe is public now, is really to fulfill 2 main objectives, right? To support the notification and reporting of subsidy data and fisheries-related information, and also to contribute to the institutional support for interagency coordination, updating legal frameworks at the domestic level, and strengthening fisheries management. The very practical aspects of how this will come to light will really be defined in the next few months by the steering committee, and as we set things up, which also highlights something that Christian spoke in the beginning, sort of the importance to being here to network and hear each other on how things are going to be shaped moving forward. So I do think I did a very good job of keeping in time. And happy to take questions and engage in conversation.
Thanks a lot. This went perfectly well, and it was really interesting. And I think these three examples of tools and approaches how to move on give a good ground now for questions. I would like to have you speaking up, introducing yourself, and I'm happy to take questions. So we have like 20 minutes left, so that's a good time. And I think, yeah, happy to start.
I am Suresh Dhanu from India. I am a traditional fisherman, and fishing has been my ancestral business. This is the first time that we have heard about last meeting and this meeting about subsidies. Now, subsidies, the definition of subsidies is not very clear to us. We would have a clear-cut definition of what a subsidy means. For that, I have certain things to tell you. I won't take much of your time. Before you decide to do everything, it should be a level playing field between all the member countries. It should not be somebody should have an undue advantage over the smaller countries or developing countries. The third is encroaching of the fishing fleet into the territorial waters and the territorial waters of other countries which are still developing. So what has happened is they come with huge fishing vessels and they encroach upon their territories. This thing has to be taken care of. Then we have to, another thing before you decide all this, you have to decide upon the juvenile fishes which are being caught. Then the fleet sizes of all the member countries. Third is capacity of the fishing vessels. And D is the minimum legal size of the fish that has to be fished. Then in this world there are three zones. It's divided into three different zones. One is a tropical zone, one is a temperate zone, and one is a frigid zone. You have to decide what fish is available in what and what is their reproducing capacities. You don't decide reproducing capacities, and because you are in the temperate zone, you have a larger fish and which does not reproduce. We should not implement our viewpoint on those countries. Then there is another thing known as interest rates. Different countries have different interest rates for financing where you come into subsidies. So the interest rates should be equal to all the member countries. Then there are taxation rates. Some countries tax at 18%, some countries tax at 5%, some tax at 12%, some tax at 28% of things. These things also have to be taken into consideration. Then the potential catches of each country and its territory. Because if you take the potential catch and what is being fished, I'll give you a very small example of India. Now, the potential catch of India is 5.31 million metric tons. And what is caught is 3.49 million metric tons. Like we talked about IUU and the implementing side as a tool. See, this data has been provided by a central agency which has got this credibility known as the Central Marine Fisheries Research Institute. And they have their people at all the landing centers of all the countries, of all the harbors in the state. Then reproduction side we have taken. The basic thing that which you have to think before implementing subsidies is livelihood. People's livelihood is dependent on that. Now, for that livelihood, I will like to expand it a little bit. For the livelihood, now can I name a country? China, for example, sends a mothership into the territorial waters of our country. It's come into less than 12 nautical miles of the country, and it was a recent.
This is the video of that, which my elder is saying. It is an Indian water, and an Indian boat is with it. You can see the boat also.
So it's China. It's coming into the territorial waters, and it's coming with FADs. And what is the size of the FADs? Is 5 lakh kilowatts, 5 lakh watts, and it's attracting everything. Now, what will happen is when it takes off, we are bereft of fish, and then you will say, yes, this country is there is no fish. We have a lot of fish available in the country. We are fishing tropical fishes which breed fast, and they breed all year round. It's not like the temperate zone where the fish don't breed so fast. And we fish basically for mackerel and sardine. Okay, and livelihood you have to take into consideration. Like the vessel of China, they have 40 members of crew members, and they catch about 2,000 tons, 3,000 tons per vessel. An Indian vessel, we employ 15 people or 10 people per vessel. Now, 40 people catching 3,000 tons and 10 people catching, you require 1,500 vessels to catch that ton, or 2,000 vessels to catch that thing. So, 2,000 into 10 is about 2,000, is 20,000 people being employed. 20,000 families catching the fish, families dependent on fishing. Whereas there are only 40 families which are dependent on fishing over there, and they are paid salary. We are not being paid, we don't pay salary most of the time in India. What we do is we profit share with our workers, and there are 10 people from the cooperative sector. India finances its thing through a cooperative sector. But 10 people, 10 families, and there are another 20 families dependent on those 10 people who go out fishing to run their livelihood. So you have got to, when you think of subsidies, don't think of subsidies like, no, he's giving 20% rebate, he's giving 10% rebate. It's not that. You have to have a level. I'll go back to earlier thing is the interest rates and taxation rates on fuel. And in India, we have multiple point taxation. Some of the taxes are being waived off. So don't say that we getting subsidies because of those things. Then the last thing which I will come to it, India is only got 2.4% of the land mass of the world, and it's got 16% of the population. So we also cannot go in for much of inland fish culture. And most of the countries, what they are doing is you are going in only for marine. People who are having aquaculture, they are dumping fish on India. So the price rise, the fuel, the price that we are getting for a catch is steady for the last 10 years. We are not getting a price, we should increase, but our input costs are increasing. So when you talk about subsidies and input costs, you should look at that when you study all these things. I think I've said quite, and your tools, sir, which you had mentioned, very good tools, but there need to be a slight improvisation on those things. I cannot come on to it now, but later on maybe I can, on your website, I can post it to you.
Happy to chat about it.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this insightful comment and statement. I take maybe another one, and then we go for an answer round. Yes, please.
I'm Olensius Moish, National Fish Workers Forum, India. While you champion the cause for reducing harmful subsidies, we see it as India as displacement of fishers' livelihood. Simply because, first of all, there is no definition of what is small-scale fisheries. I've been raising every time. Secondly, as my friend has said, that subsidies in India are very minimal. It's like kind of a small tax rebate what we get. And if I have to travel 100 kilometers, how do I go? Yeah, because initially I used to fish inside 5 nautical mile. Then I had to go 12 nautical mile, then I had to go 24 nautical mile, and then I keep going further. This is primarily not because of overfishing, because in India we have been always doing sustainable fishing, we're using this gill net. It's a community-based fishing. But due to industrial waste, other factors which are there, global warming, temperature rise, then as you said, the focus towards culture fisheries is forcing us to go further. So now we are in a race to save the fish, but we have forgotten that we have to save the fishers. Because in India, 60% of the fishers are still living below poverty line. We do not have proper processing yards, we do not have the ice plants. Basic amenities still women folk, they don't have proper market to sell. So there is multiple issues which are arising here. So I just want to say, and also I just want to add to the fund aspect which you have said around 13 million US. I don't see that fund used for fisheries as such. Like for example, we have ghost net issues. We have this nylon nets being used. We could use another nets which are eco-friendly. We can also use the mode of transportation. In India, we still use kerosene. We still use sailboats to go for fishing. So you can imagine how difficult it is for us to go. So and this kind of subsidies, this kind of fund which is being used, it looks only for management, could be used as an alternative fuel for the fishers also. I just want to suggest that. So because our only say is that in India, if you cap subsidies, which is very minimum anyways to us, because post COVID we have seen 50% drop in subsidies. We just get minimum is fuel VAT reimbursement, and I think if there is an agreement, it will be detrimental for all both fishers.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So maybe we go for one more. Okay, and I also have a friend here. So it's 4 or 5.
Okay, we will try to be very fast. So,
Enrique, yeah.
thank you very much for your comment. In India, I think the situation, I'm from Mexico, the situation it's kind of similar. When listening to you, I say, it talks like Juan Pedro, a fisherman from Mexico. So what I have learned working with small-scale fisheries is that in countries like Mexico and India, the subsidies that we are giving cannot be compared with the big subsidizers. So the level it's not equal. So if staying where we are losing. The budget of our governments can never compete with the budget of China, EU, or other big countries. So allowing subsidies in the world plays against less developed countries. So if the bar is not subsidies at all, it's better for us because we can never get on that level. And second, the problems we have, and in Mexico it's not that much, but also talking with fishermen in Uruguay, Argentina, Chile, Peru, Ecuador, China fleet it's also going to Latin America. And part of the stocks that probably they are not invading the economic exclusive zone, but part of the stocks are harvests in the line of the 200 miles. So the Chinese vessels arrive there because they are heavily subsidized. If there is no subsidies at all, not for them and not for us, it will be better for us because they will not approach. And the third thing I have learned working with fishermen in so many years is that subsidies help fishermen to survive this day or to the very short to save the day or the month, but are not solving the problems. The big problems of IUU, that we have illegal fisheries in this country, the big problems of ghost nets, the big problems of lack of management, of climate change and need to adaptation are not being solved by subsidies. If we are able to start in these negotiations, making the race for hiring the bar instead of lowering the bar, instead of asking more flexibilities for us, asking less flexibilities for them, even if that costs flexibilities for us. It's great because at the end, the best that could happen for small-scale fisheries is having less subsidies in all the world and having more money for the things that will change things. That is climate change, that is pollution, that it's management, and things like that. And when looking about the fish fund, then we could have money for that. And that for me, I understand you as fishermen and but these subsidies help me. But in the long run, the treatment, the agreement is putting us in a better position in my way. So I like your exposition and how we have to take a lot of things, but probably simplifying in one single thing. They have more budget than us, and in that situation we will never win. That's another way of looking and fighting for hiring the bar instead of lowering. So that's my opinion, and thank you for all your explanation.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, my point
Thank
is
you.
very simple actually.
Okay, we have three more. We have one gentleman here behind me, and then so it's
I will
three
take
more.
only 2 minutes, not more than 2 minutes.
So
Can we address it first and then?
yeah, and then we take
the
the three more and behind that. Thank you. Who wants to start?
So,
Please let first the three gentlemen respond, and then we have three more questions from the audience. Okay, thank you.
I can, yeah. So, I mean, your point touches on, I think, the core of the negotiations of the WTO. So, what we have with Fish One is, addressing the problems that we already know. We have fish stocks around the world that are collapsing, and prohibiting the provision of subsidies to further have them collapsing, obviously is something that has been addressed in Fish 1. What is now being discussed with Fish 2 is more of a preventative approach. And that's what I mentioned in some of the data. Yes, we have stocks that are collapsing, that are chased by distant water fishing fleets, but we also have stocks that are collapsing by artisanal fishers in countries. So, yesterday I think somebody said at the end of the day for the fish it doesn't really matter if he has been caught in a big net or a small net by hand or etc. It's out of the water, and I think that's where the agreement is trying to address that. And I think the main point where the transparency aspect comes really into is then to see, from the things that are prohibited, what flexibilities have the various countries, and is that actually justified? I think one of the concerns that there is at the moment is that you can still give subsidies if you show proper fisheries management regime in place. Well, what is proper? And you may see the fisheries management regime different than others. So that's again where the baseline of the fisheries management has to be a very transparent regime on that, and that so we have to wait what's coming out of this week before we go into the topics. But whatever comes out, the aspect of having data available for everyone to understand the current situation, I think is absolutely foundational.
Thank you.
Yes, maybe a few points from me on your point regarding the importance to level the playing field. I'm convinced that the existing agreement already provides some tools to go in that direction to some extent. Of course, it won't solve the entire problem, but we know that there is a global study that essentially estimated that 80% of global subsidies are provided to industrial fleets, large-scale industrial fleets, and less than 20 to small-scale fishing. And I believe some of the elements in the agreement can allow to somewhat level the playing field, and to by imposing disciplines on the large-scale industrial fishing nations. Something that's interesting to note is that in the current negotiations this week, there is this approach with 2 tiers of members and stricter disciplines for developed members as well as distant water fishing nations. And so that's one element that may go in that direction, which is interesting from this week's negotiations. Your point on encroachments on national waters, very important, and I suspect it's not only an issue in India, it's an issue in many members and many developing countries. And here, the existing rule on IUU fishing is a possible tool to try to address that, right? Because to the extent you can monitor this fishing activity and identify those cases of illegal fishing within your waters, then you're able to trigger that subsidy prohibition on the vessels that are subsidized by distant water fishing nations. So this is a tool from the agreement that's available to address that. Also, thank you for the comment on the tool. I would be very happy to exchange on that if you have ideas. And maybe just on the question of the fact that there is no definition of small-scale fisheries. Yes, that's absolutely right. It's been a key topic in discussions at the WTO. It continues to be a key topic this week because there is this suggested exemptions for artisanal fishing under the new rules. So artisanal fishing would be exempted. But the key question here is how do we circumscribe that exemption? How do we characterize the fishing that would be exempted? And of course, there are debates between members. Some want the exemption to be wider, others want to limit it to very artisanal fishing. So there are debates on that. But yes, it's a key question.
Thank you very much. Jonathan, would you like to respond? Or it's
Yeah, I
4
don't-
minutes left. So
Yeah, I don't think I have anything to add except the idea of the fund is not to have, if I understood your comment correctly, a compensatory measure. It is to create a sort of suite of what is available from a technical assistance and capacity building perspective to implement the agreement, right? But that's
okay. So the remaining 3 minutes, we have 3 more questions. You think it's possible to keep it short? So you were the first one, sorry, but very short, like 1 minute, and then it's fair maybe to others.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. My name is Dr. Manuel da Costa. I come from Timor-Leste. I'm the new member of the WTO. But this is new information for me for the fisheries because we need a capacity building for the Timor-Leste about the subsidy, fish subsidy, because what I understand is during now before we member of the WTO, we just a lot import fish, not we still not able to cap the fish in the country because we don't have our salaries and no capacity to cap the fish in the country. That's why I think that this is new information for me, and we need capacity building for the and also investment for the to cap or silo the fish in our country because we import not chicken but fish from China. But the problem is about we still confused with the sanitary problem because sometimes the fish from other country come to import to Timor-Leste. Sometimes it's always spoilage. That's why sometimes confused. We say that this is good quality or bad quality, that's why we should ask to the WTO to give more information. I think that's good. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Costa. So,
Yeah, one point.
one.
It's very simple. This transparency is needed not only in fisheries. It is needed in all the sector. And another one is this small scale fishermen and these artisanal fishermen, all those things. When you are making a scheme or a design, there should be some experts. In the case, I mean fisheries experts. I am sorry to say that I don't find is there any fisheries experts in your group. So there are, we people are fishermen and also practicing fishermen, active fishermen. So if somebody is with you, then there will be some suggestion from their point. We can take their inputs. So what is subsidy and how can we suggest subsidy and how it will help to develop the fisheries sector. In some countries, fisheries fishing is mechanizing, not modernizing. That also we have to understand.
Thank you very much.
We are
And
all
Mr. Port?
Yeah, there was another criticism of subsidies. I would like to stress this agreement is not about subsidies as such, about harmful subsidies. Subsidies as such are not necessarily bad. If you have, for instance, a permanent succession scheme, then you take ships out of the fleet, it's beneficial for the stock. If you subsidize more selective gear, it's good for the stock. If you subsidize the transformation from fossil fuel to more environmental fuel, it's a positive subsidy. So because there's a lot of criticism, no subsidies whatsoever, you said it, no subsidies whatsoever, no, it has to be distinguished. And well, I'm from, before I didn't forget to introduce myself, my name is Hermann Pott, German Ministry of Agriculture in charge of fisheries, structural policy, and actually we hand out subsidies that we think for the good purposes, always linked to the, let's say, ecological, good ecological status of the stock. So that's got to be kept in mind. We should not attack subsidies as such, but the harmful ones. And for that, the transparency is good in order to identify harmful subsidies. What's like that?
So finally, subsidy is harmful.
No, harmful is not per se harmful. It depends on the nature of the subsidy.
People are sitting here and there, and we are not having the voice of talking about for our demands. You are not giving sufficient time also for that. Such a big question, such big issues we are discussing, and people are sitting there and there, and we have no opportunity for us to express our views. And you are limiting the time only 5 minutes, 10 minutes. You people are talked to too much time you have taken. What is this? No, so for a common cause, for it is my personal interest or my country's personal interest. It is not like that. It is a common purpose, common interest you have to take care. No. So
Thank you very much. Now we have, our time is done, but as we see, there's still lots to discuss, and that's what was our wish, that we open a forum and that we offer these tools and space for discussions and also to foster transparency.